Welcome back for part 2 of our TM Soup to Nuts video series. In today's episode is where the rubber hits the road and we actually get to jump into the system and look at all the basic setup tasks in configurations and in the Fiori Launchpad that you must undertake in order to be able to use basic transportation management in SAP S/4HANA Cloud. So without further ado, like a good old diesel, let's get warmed up and jump right into it. If you are knowledgeable in TM, then most of the information provided and presented here will not be new to you. However, if you are not, then it is important that you understand what the tasks that are presented on this one slide are, why it is important that you carry them out, how you should be carrying them out. Indeed, the 4 tasks that are presented on this slide are of key importance. Failure to execute them completely or partially will result in errors in your TM processes later on. So it's important that you understand what these tasks are, how you should go about executing them, and why you should be executing them. The slide has been presented in such a way that we discuss what needs to be done, how is it going to be done, i.e. what app is going to be used in the system to execute that task, and why are we doing it. The first task is the setup of the TM organizational structures. As you probably understand by now, whenever you create transactional data in the system, there is some or multiple organizational levels that are implicated. Meaning that if you execute, for example, a general ledger entry, it could be that you're just referring to a company code. If you're creating a sales order, you would be referring to a sales area. If you're creating a purchase order, you would be referring to a purchasing organization. TM is no different. In order to function correctly, it also needs organizational structures. However, it needs its own specific organizational structures. From a TM point of view, they are called org units. And whilst they are also called company code, purchasing organization, and purchasing group, they are in effect technically different to the company code, purchasing organization, and purchasing group that you would find in the enterprise structure that you have already set up. So for TM to work correctly, to have access to those organizational structures, you will need to leverage the app Create and Update TM Organizations to select which of the purchasing organizations, existing or newly created, as well as purchasing group, also existing or newly created, you will want to leverage in TM. This app will then take those organizational levels that you have indicated and convert or mirror them, if you like, in the TM space so that the TM processes can be executed correctly. The second task pertains to the creation of locations. Again, when you create a sales order, you might refer to a ship to party, and that ship to party has an address. Similarly, if you are creating a purchase order, you might indicate a supplier, and that supplier also has an address that might become a pickup address. However, these addresses cannot be used by TM. TM to function correctly requires another master data object called locations. And the app that will need to be used to in effect mirror these addresses in TM as locations is the app named Create Locations. And this app will be used to create locations for your shipping points as well as the addresses of your business partners. It's also important to note that it is very likely that this is an activity that you will need to execute periodically, because as you have new business partners to whom you sell products to, they will also need to have a location created for their addresses. So depending on the speed at which you create new customers, hence addresses in the system, or suppliers, and again addresses in the system, you'll also need to think about how often you want to run this job to create locations from those addresses. And this is a job that can be run on demand or programmed to run as a batch job whenever you like, with a given periodicity. The third task is the creation of service products. Now, the need for that is that we have a handshake in the process where we go from the freight order to the settlement process, and to settle we need a purchasing object, which would be the purchase orders, service entry sheet, and those two worlds use different objects to rate, to price, if you like, a particular transport. So in TM we would be using freight charges, charge types, and in purchasing we will be using materials, service items. So this particular task of creating and updating service product is going to look at the charge types that you've nominated, that you use in TM, and for each one of those nominated charge types you want to have a corresponding service product, a service material created. This will be a fully fledged serve material that will be accessible in your Material Master or Product Master apps. Lastly is to identify the company code. Again, in your business processes, depending on whether we're looking at an outbound transportation process or an inbound transportation process, there will be a need to identify who the shipper is if we're looking at outbound, or who the consignee is if we're looking at inbound. And from a TM point of view, the object that is used to identify that would be a business partner. But that business partner also corresponds to your nominated company code. So in that last task of identifying the company code, you will first need to create a business partner in the exact same method and fashion that you would use to create a normal business partner, a customer supplier. But then you will need to go into a app which is assigned business partner to TM organization, where you will then assign that business partner to a corresponding company code. And all of these apps will be available in the tab Transportation Master Data. Another thing that is also very important to note is that all of these tasks are done in the Fiori Launchpad and not in your self-service configuration UIs. The importance of that is that it means that these tasks will need to be carried out in both your quality system and in your P system. Meaning that before using transportation processes in your production landscape, you will need to have added a cutover task, so to speak, to make sure that all your basic settings have been set up correctly in your P system after having successfully tested them in your Q system, of course. So now that we are in the system, the first task we want to do is to create the TM organizational structures by mirroring the ones that already exist in the enterprise structure. So we select the appropriate job template. We can rename it if you like. We then select the periodicity, which is going to run immediately, and then indicate in the parameters the purchasing organization, which in this case will be 1010, that we want to mirror into TM. And we also indicate the purchasing group that we will want to use in TM, which in this case is going to be 005. We check that the parameters are complete and accepted. If it's okay, we schedule the job, which will have an immediate execution. And once the job is finished, there will be a log advising if there were any errors or if the job was successful, which in this case was successful. We can also look at the job details and see what ensued. So we can see here that 3 organizational units were created, 2 for the purchasing organization and group that we had indicated, and a third one for the company code, even though we had not indicated the company code, but was automatically deduced from the association of the purchasing organization that we had indicated to the company code that is already existing in the enterprise structure. The next task will be to create locations for shipping points as well as business partners. Whilst you can run the job for both shipping points and business partners, For example purposes, we'll segregate the two. So first we'll run for shipping points. And again, you select the template, you can select the periodicity, and then in the parameters section, you would indicate the selection criteria that you would use. So in this case, we will select the shipping point 1010. We will check that the parameters are accepted and then schedule the job to run immediately. Again, once the job has finished running, there will be a log output to advise of success or errors. And again, you can check the log. And in this case, it says that the location SP_1010 has been created for shipping point 1010. So SP meaning shipping point. So all the shipping points will be replicated as locations with the same code as the shipping point, but prefixed with the letters SP. So now we are using the same application again, this time to create a location for a business partner, which happens to be a customer in this case. So you can use the usual search capabilities to find the business partner or business partners that you would want to have their addresses converted into locations. Noting that if this was a job scheduled periodically, you might indicate different parameters, of course. Again, we do a check, we schedule the job to run immediately, and as before, a success or failure log will be output. In this case, it was successful, and if we check it, we can see that for business partners, the location code is the same ID as that of the corresponding business partner. The next task is the creation of the service products, which, if you recall, I said will mimic or mirror the charge types that we use in TM. So again, we use a job. In this case, however, we have a few more parameters that are mostly mandatory that need to be indicated, noticeably the purchasing group, the material group, the material type, the charge type, and the plant. So these parameters will be used to create service materials in those parameters based on the charge we select. So in this case, we are going to be creating a service material in plant 1010 for the charge type SF04, which corresponds to the basic rate in TM. Again, we do a check, we schedule the job, we have a log that is produced, we can check the log. And what is important or what is of interest here, we can see the material group, purchasing group, material type, but more importantly, the service product 184 corresponding to that charge type SF04 has been created. As I said previously, this product is a fully fledged material of type serve that you can view in the Manage Product Master Data app. So we'll indicate our product number 184, and you can see the basic rate, which is the description that is the same as what we had in the charge type, and we have a fully fledged material that has been produced. And now for the last task to be carried out in the Fiori Launchpad, which is the association of a previously created business partner representing our company code and assigning it to the company code itself. And as I said, this will help to identify the shipper in outbound processes as well as the consignee in inbound processes. So we simply indicate the business partner, we save the entry, and we're done. Now, before we go on, and because the first process that we are going to be looking at is the outbound transportation process, i.e. a process that is linked to requirements emanating from your sales orders, there is one aspect that we also need to look at, which is that of pricing. To be more specific, we need to see if you will be leveraging the YBHD charge type, which is a charge that is set independently of what happens in transportation management, i.e. within your sales and distribution documents, you can decide what the charge is going to be. For example, it could be a flat rate, as I said, independent of what happens in transportation management. The other option that you have is that you also have the ability of, once the charges have been determined in the transportation management side of the house, i.e. in your freight orders, you will have the ability to aggregate those freight charges, those freight amounts deduced in transportation management, and copy them across into your billing document that you will issue to your customers. So the example that we are looking at is the one that we have before us. So in transportation management, which is what is depicted here on the left-hand side, you could have a variety of charges pertaining to the base freight, insurance, loading charges, documentation charges, etc., etc. Now, each one of these line items is going to potentially have a charge associated to it, and you have the option of aggregating those charge amounts into one amount that would then be copied into the customer invoice that you will issue to your customers. Now, if you wish to pursue this particular option, so of copying your transportation management charges into your customer invoice, then there are certain steps that we need to do in addition in configuration. The first is that we need to create a new charge type, one where we declare that a function that allows the system to understand that we want to go and fetch the charges that have been produced in TM and copy them into the invoice issued to the customer. But because we are going to be creating a new charge type, it means that we are also going to be altering the pricing procedure, i.e. the various charges that the sales and distribution document is going to be looking at to establish the total amount invoiced to the customers. So again, using best practices, what we will do here, rather than changing the standard, we are going to be creating a new pricing procedure that will leverage this new charge type that we will have just created. We then also have an additional optional step, which is that you can have this pricing procedure that will not necessarily apply to all of your customers. So to differentiate those customers for whom we want this pricing procedure to apply, what we are going to do is we are going to create what we call a customer pricing procedure. And this is a code that we will need to add to those business partners, those customers where we want this pricing procedure to be picked up. But in saying all of this, it means that we also need to establish a new pricing procedure determination. In other words, we need to tell the system that if those parameters present themselves, then we want you to use pricing procedure X over pricing procedure Y as an example. So we'll jump into the system and we'll look at all of those aspects right now. As usual, all of this configuration that we need to do, it needs to happen in the Manage Your Solution application. And once we are there, we want to go into Configure Your Solution. Of course, as usual, make sure that the country that you are set to be configuring in is the correct one. In my case, I'll be using the US, so this is correct. We'll go into Configure Your Solution. Now, what we want to do is we want to go to the application area of sales. And we also want to go into the areas of price management. Again, this is just a way to kind of restrict the amount of configuration options that we have. So as we can see in the price management sub-application area, there are 15 steps that are available to us, but we will only be requiring a few of those steps. Namely, what we are going to be needing is the set condition types for pricing. We are going to be using set pricing procedures, set customer pricing procedures, and the set pricing procedure determination. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go and create this new pricing condition, which is the one that we have discussed here. Now, the charge that we need to create is going to be very similar to the existing YBHD freight charge. So let's go to position and find YBHD, which is our source charge, if you like. And from here, what we're going to do, so if we go to details, the freight charge that we need to create is exactly the same as what you see here, except that the condition function is going to be different. As I said, the condition function is going to stipulate the code to which we are not privy to, that will explicit that we need to, or that we want to go and fetch the pricing from the TM transportation side of the house. So I've got YBHD selected. It's selected, and we're going to say copy as, and we are going to call it ZTRA freight from TM. And as I said, the only thing that we need to change here is the condition function, and we're going to pick the FCTM freight cost from transportation management as the function. And we then click on copy, which is going to create this new ZTRA freight charge. We save it and we exit. Now that we have created this pricing condition, the next thing we need to do is we need to add it to a particular pricing procedure. And as I said, we will start off by creating our very own pricing procedure. So we go to set pricing procedure. We position ourselves onto the pricing procedure that we want to use as a template, which in my case is going to be A17024, which is this one. So again, I'm just going to select it. If I quickly go into it to see the details of it, what we want to do is we want to, in effect, replace the existing pricing condition for freight that is in this particular pricing procedure, which is YBHD, and we will want to replace it with our ZTRA pricing condition that we have just created. So let's go back to the pricing procedures. We are going to pick our reference. We're going to say copy as, and here I'm going to give it a name as we had decided here. So it's going to be ZPR171. I'm going to call it ZPR171. We are then going to press on copy, and here we have the option of copying everything or only copying the high level entry. We're going to say copy all to copy all of the dependent data, conditions, etc. And we can see that we have 51 entries that were copied, i.e. pricing conditions. Before we save everything, we select our newly created pricing procedure. We go down to Procedures, Control Data, and this is where we will now replace the YBHD pricing condition, which is here, with our very own ZTRA pricing condition. So let me just call it Z something to quickly go to it, which is this one. Select it. Now my pricing procedure is as I want it to be, and I'm going to save that. Again, now that I am done, I can exit this configuration entry, and I can move on to the next one, which is the creation of a customer pricing procedure. And this is the entry that we want to go to now. So set customer pricing procedure. Again, we go into the configuration of it. And this is going to be fairly new. I'm just going to say new entry. I'm going to call it ZT, and we'll call it TM customers. Again, I save my entry, and that's great. So now that we have fulfilled all the prerequisites, so we've created the charge, we've created the pricing procedure, we've created the customer pricing procedure, the next thing that we can move on to is the pricing procedure determination. In other words, provide the information to the system that will enable it to determine the appropriate pricing procedure to use depending on the combination that is presented there, which is the sales area, so the sales organization plus the distribution channel plus the division, and then the document pricing procedure as well as the customer pricing procedure. Now, obviously, the customer pricing procedure is the one that we have just created, ZT. If you're unfamiliar or if you don't know what the document pricing procedure code that you should be using is, one way to find out is to go back to the document that you will be using, the document type that you will be using itself. So to find this, let's go back one step to manage, configure your solution. Again, let's go back into sales. This time we'll go for the sub application area. We will go to sales order management processing, and what we want to do is go to sales order management, configure sales document types, configure, and the document type that I will be using in my processes to create the sales orders will be documents type OR. So again, I go to the entry, click on position to find the document type OR because there are quite a few, and then I select it, go into the details, and here we can see that the document pricing procedure is Y1. Okay, so now that I have that information, I can go back to my pricing entries and complete the pricing procedure determination. So once again, for the corresponding entry, we click on Set Pricing Procedure. And what we'll do now is we'll just create new entries. And we'll say that for 1710, distribution channel 10, division 00, for a document pricing procedure of Y1, which is the one that we had in the document type, and the customer pricing procedure ZT, which is the one that we have just created. This will determine the pricing procedure that we created, which is ZPR, again, trying to find it, ZPR171, okay. And again, we can save this. Of course, now that we have created this new pricing procedure, and in particular a customer pricing procedure, we need to go into those business partners that need to leverage this particular pricing procedure with the TM freight charge, and update those business partners in the sales area, of course, with the appropriate customer pricing procedure that we just created, which is ZT. So here we go into the business partner, sales area details, customer pricing procedure. We indicate ZT, and that business partner will now leverage that whole pricing procedure that we just created whenever we create a sales order for him in the sales area that we indicated the pricing procedure to be valid in. Okay, so we are now in the home stretch. The last thing that we need to do now is to look at the copy control from the delivery to the billing document, where we need to make a small alteration to the source of information when we copy the information to the billing document. So for that, we'll go back to Manage Your Solution, then take the area Sales, Sub-Application, Sales Billing, and we want to look at the copy control of the delivery documents to the billing documents. Once there, we try and find the source LF for delivery and F2 for the billing type, which is what we will be using. Then we drill down for that combination to the item level, and there we find the item category TAN, which is the normal item, standard item, and within that standard item we go to the details, and there we need to change the price source from E for Echo to I for India. So we are going from delivery order to order freight order, because as said, the charges will come from the freight order. And that's it. Well, this concludes this episode, so thank you for sticking in there. And the next episode is when we really get into it and we start creating sales orders, and we'll look at the freight unit building rule. So that really is the handover from sales over to transportation. So until then, stay safe.
My dad's make it hurt.